Hey, flower friends, welcome back to another Field and Garden podcast. It is your friend in flowers, Lisa Mason Ziegler. And friends, I am talking about today for gardeners to apply some of the tips and tricks that this flower farmer has learned through the years that's going to make your landscape potentially more beautiful, easier to take care of, and even more attractive to beneficial creatures, which if that's not on your play card, it should be, right? And, I fell in love with gardening so quick and fast that I kind of went in blindfolded. And that's what I'm going to talk about today, is about how I learned to fix many of the problems I suffered from that just make landscaping not easy to keep. But before we jump in there, I just want to welcome you. If this is your first time listening to the Field and Garden podcast, I am so glad you're here, friend. I know that there's a lot of choices out there, and it is not lost on me. If you've chosen to listen to this, I am honored and humbled, and I hope you can just really gain some knowledge and learn a tip or a trick or something that's really going to help you out in your garden, because this podcast is brought to you by thegardenersworkshop.com, and our mission is to empower people to grow cut flowers, whether it is for pleasure or for profit, to equip you, to educate you, to just make it possible. Because that's the problem, y'all. It's that flash fire in a pan. We all get hyped up, we plant a bunch of stuff, and then it just gets overgrown, we lose control, you tell somebody to mow it and you never do it again. And I'm hoping that some of my tips today that I've learned will help you to maybe be able to maintain. So remember that you can find everything that we offer, free resources, our online garden shop, our online courses, connect with our live gardening show, which demonstrates how we do stuff and what we do it with, over at thegardenersworkshop.com. I invite you to check that out, as well as to sign up for our farm news. We have a very comprehensive newsletter, meaning it is strategic. Seasonal reminders of blogs, videos, specials. Just find it to be very helpful. So you can sign up for that. I'm sure there'll be a link in the show notes, but you can always find it at thegardenersworkshop.com, down at the bottom of each page. And you can go in over there, y'all, and fall in. And so let's just start at the beginning. When I didn't know about gardening rules or practices when I started out. I fell for gardening, fell in head first, and just went at it and didn't even think about stuff. And the practices that I'm talking about are those that are really useful because they help us by making it lower maintenance, to make our gardens look better, and to even attract those beneficial creatures I mentioned earlier. All those things that you might be wanting in your garden, right? And I thought I would share with you those potholes that I fell into, because y'all remember, I was barely a gardener when I ventured into flower farming. So I learned by trial and fire, right? And so I'm going to be offering up what some of the befuddles that I fell up against, and then the solutions that I learned that I didn't discover. They've been there all along. I just didn't know about them, and they are so hands down worth pursuing, learning, and figuring out, and actually doing them in your garden. So I just have a few tips here. This will be a quick and easy listen. So the place I needed to start that I didn't know was understanding that there's different tiers or groups of plants. And I would say that this is the best place to start, because I had no idea that there were different types of plants. I guess I kind of did. I knew there were trees. I knew there were shrubs. I knew they were perennials, but I don't think I knew they were perennials. That's what I'm talking about. Just the big 30,000 foot view of plants, right? I think I did understand that there were plants that grew better in shade and those that grew better in sun. But I just never knew how different the care can be for different plant families. I mean, the variation is big, and if I wanted to succeed, I knew that I needed to figure this out. And so, again, I knew that there were trees, shrubs, perennials, and then I began to learn that there were also annuals. And whenever you're hearing me talk about annuals, I consider that there's two types, cool season and warm season, just to keep it simple, right? That's like complicated enough considering trees, shrubs, perennials, warm season and cool season annuals. That is far enough to figure out. And I just kind of lumped them all together in my mind and thought they all followed the same kind of rules other than the shade and sun, but they don't. And the bottom line is that you need to understand that there are different types of families of plants, and within those families there are different requirements. And I just walked into this blindfolded, literally, and I never really was introduced to all of this. It's really a simple hierarchy, but I never really learned about it till I became a flower farmer. And if you want to grow a beautiful landscape, you just have to get a basic understanding and then plant the same type of plants together. I learned that in a flower farming working garden, right? Obviously in a working cutting garden, that makes sense, right? You plant a bed and you put all the zinnias you're growing together. You're planting the ageratum all together, the basil all together, the sunflowers together. It just makes for easier harvesting, right? Well, in a landscaping situation, y'all, it is even more beneficial, I have learned, by mass planting, and you can do this in a very beautiful way, similar plants together. Particularly when you're first tackling a landscape or first learning about all of this or first learning how to garden. Because the point of planting a landscape versus, a vegetable garden that you're only going to have for maybe the summer months or something. This is a garden that you think in your mind you're planting for years. I mean, that's why you buy trees and shrubs, right? They're a bigger investment. You're counting on them being there. And I want to tell you just a little bit of a story that kind of helped me to understand this better. When we embarked upon planting the native border that now almost completely surrounds my 3-acre city flower farm. When we first were faced with that housing development that was coming in the adjoining 40 acres, I mean, it was like my little farm was in the middle of the city because of this neighbor. Well, when that got sold, I knew who to hire. It was a native plant landscape designer who she and I met at a conference where we were both speaking. I was so impressed with her, but the concept of a native mixed border was really what roped me in. Anyway, when we knew this development was coming and the horses and 40 acres of grazing grass and beautiful flora was going to be ripped from the earth, we hired Denise to come and look at what was growing over there and then to make a cohesive plan that we could follow on our property. And interestingly enough, so she made one of the long sides of our property. It has been so long, y'all, I'm going to guess and say is 500 feet long. I'm not sure that's right, but let's just say it's 500 feet long. So instead of having 500 feet of about a 20-foot wide mixed border, mixed means trees and shrubs and even perennials if you want them. We didn't do perennials, just trees and shrubs. That 500-foot border wasn't a modge-podge of all these different things. She created a 50-foot border that was grouping individual types of plants together and then just repeated it within that 50 feet. And then she took that 50 feet of this repeat and just repeated that 50 foot over and over again. It made it so simple for us to plant and to purchase and all that stuff. But y'all, what I learned through this process is it also makes it simple for the creatures that we're trying to give home base to, the native insects, the native birds, lizards, reptiles, everybody from the ground up, right? Ground beetles, frogs, turtles, all of them. We're trying to give them a habitat. It's easier for them to find their place when there's more than one shrub planted here, one shrub planted down there. It's better to have 3 shrubs of the same or 5 shrubs. And it was just a real eye-opener to me. And also in talking to her and learning from her, you know, when you're planting for your landscape, that also rolls over to a more soothing type of landscape. Instead of it being very helter-skelter, one here, one there situation, having them massed more together. And I didn't plan on saying this, but this just reminds me, I watched a short, I don't know if it was a documentary or whatever it was about English gardeners. And in it was a guy whose name I do not remember, who was a pretty well-known landscape and container gardener. And he said the one secret to creating voluptuous containers is to have large containers like whiskey barrel size, but then to only plant one type of flower and pack them in to that one container, and then have multiple containers for a mix of colors, but to not mix within the containers. And I'm doing that this fall, by the way. I just learned this not long ago. But it's that same concept of massing the same together. Because let me tell you what else that rolls out to. Easier maintenance, easier care, easier for creatures like pollinators to find, you know, when there's 5 shrubs blooming. For us, southern wax myrtles are a big native shrub that we have a lot of here because they are such an eastern bluebird favorite, which we have lots of eastern bluebirds, as well as many other birds. And so I think those are all planted in masses of 3 or more. It's that same concept. So it was really helpful to me to see this grouping together, understanding a little bit more of plants' needs and that different families have different needs. And then by grouping them together, it simplifies the care so much. And it helps the creatures, and it helps me to take care of it, which means that the long-term view of me still having the same landscape. You edit a landscape, by the way. You know, landscapes, trees and shrubs, a lot of times don't have a life, a true life, meaning to benefit you visually more than 15 to 20 years. But you can edit, meaning pruning, much harder than I prune really hard because I'm a flower farmer. I've seen the benefits of cutting a plant almost to the ground and how it regrows and it's healthier and happier. A lot of these shrubs and plants can also have that done, and perennials for sure. But just recognize that simplifying your landscape and understand that there's different families. And the more simple you make it, and the more you mass those simples together, the easier it is. So that's kind of the information you need to know going into this. Now, one of the funnest things for me is assessing what I have, taking stock of what is in your landscape. And, you know, I love drawing plans. I am not an artist by any stretch of the imagination, but I learned from my dad about graph paper, the little squares, and there's all different sizes of squares as well as sizes of paper. To measure your borders, your landscape around your house, go out there with a tape measure and then go back in your house. You're not putting plants on it yet. Measure your beds around your house, then go in and draw it just, you know, what the beds are, and then your house will be in the interior of that. It might just be easier to measure your house. It really depends on your house, right? To measure the exterior of your house, you don't have to be perfect, y'all, just close. And then measure your beds, put them around there. And then here's a secret that we saw our dad use so much. You don't then draw your plants on that graph paper. That is your foundation. Your house isn't really going to change, right? Your beds may or may not change, but then you also have tracing paper that you put on top of that drawing, and that's what you draw your dreams, your hopes, your changes on, because that way you don't have to draw your basic landscape plan over and over again, right? Anyway, side note that was. So you get your basic plan, and you don't even have to do it that much. It's just that's a really fun thing to do, and once you figure out how to do it, you can apply it to everything. That's how I designed my house, our buildings that are here, because I learned about graph paper and learning about 1 square is a foot. Makes it super easy, y'all. I mean, make cutout pieces of your furniture, y'all. Measure them. It is so much fun. Anyway, you can do the same thing with your landscape. Go out there and identify. Then once you have your foundation of what you have, your space and the size, then what is it you have that you want to keep? If you have overgrown stuff, I am all for just ripping it out, if you have a way to do that. And just assess what you have. Don't go to your dreams yet, y'all. Figure out what you actually have. And I would say start really simple. Maybe do one side of your house, or maybe the front of your house, or whatever one area is. And then think about, what can I do now, because this is coming out in late summer. What can I do this fall, a small job, to have the biggest impact for spring garden, right? And so I would call this kind of your seasonal planning. And again, just start small to make it manageable, affordable in labor and in the cost of what you might need to invest in. So this could involve, as I'll talk about in a minute, planting some cool season hardy annuals that are winter hardy in your area, and follow the rules that we're getting ready to talk about of grouping them all together in a strategic little spot where you're going to enjoy them the most. But think about things, and the fall is, side note, the fall is definitely the best time for you to fall plant trees and shrubs and perennials. You should not plant, in my humble opinion, those 3 groups of plants at any other time than fall. Think about this. When you plant those in the fall, it's just like planting cool season hardy annuals on time, y'all. You get them in the ground in time for them to actually be able to lay down some roots, get all settled into their new house before they have to start performing in spring, and then facing heat and humidity, which introduces pests and diseases. It is so important for trees' longevity to really get settled in quickly, which means fall planting. Why do places sell trees in the spring? Because people see trees blooming in the spring, cherry trees, pear trees, all those trees, magnolia trees. They see them blooming and they want to run to the store and buy it then, and that is the worst possible time. But the nurseries sell them then because that's when they sell and people want them. Okay, so fall planting, this planning is a time to consider if you want to add those types of things to your small area you're tackling first. The fall is definitely the time to do it. But before you plant, finish this podcast, y'all. Okay? So that's what I kind of call seasonal planting. And the whole moral to this story, I would say, is to learn about moving away from planting one here, one there, one over there, one over here, one over there of the same thing. It's grouping them together for a lot of beneficial reasons. All right. So first off, let's talk about how when you follow that grouping, whether you're talking about annuals, trees, really trees, but that's a much bigger, we won't talk about trees, or shrubs. When you group multiples together, typically in odd numbers, you're creating focal points. using clusters of similar plants helps your eye recognize, land on, and just kind of rest for a minute. And that's the harmony of a beautiful garden and a beautiful landscape. It's that intentionality. You don't realize it when you do this, but it also does this, and you'll hear me say this many times, this same massing together, so it's easier for your eye to recognize and to rest and to like say, oh yeah, that's XYZ, or to just stop and rest and enjoy. That very same thing happens with creatures like pollinators, butterflies, native bees, bumblebees, all those guys. It is so much easier for them to find you when you follow that. And you know, I would venture to say that if you are like me, I love looking through gardening magazines. I love reading them too, but looking through when there's beautiful landscapes or books. I mean, I have so many books, y'all. I mean, I have a library here at my home, and I just love books. And if you open up a magazine or you open up a book and you're paging through, you're perusing, you're bored, I would suggest this is a great exercise instead of scrolling, y'all. And all of a sudden, you see something that stops you from turning the page. It's true, it stops you from scrolling too. But you just stop. And what is stopping you is usually that harmony, that not chaotic plantings, but you'll see larger masses of the same flowers together. Because, you know, I find that people sometimes do buy the right number of 5 or 7 of a plant, but then we bring them home and we sprinkle them around instead of massing them in a beautiful way together, which is truly the best. And you may have heard me speak of before our hydrangea groves. That's exactly where the groves came from. When I came here, married Stevie, and we moved into this house, Grandma she did have some massed hydrangeas together in a couple of areas here, but the trees that had been sheltering them were cut down through the years, and I knew they had to be relocated. But then as I started moving them, it's like, where do I move them to? The simplest thing became to put them all in one area where they got their perfect conditions. And in fact, I didn't know I was doing this. I was massing them together. Not only is it a sight to behold, but it is just so soothing and intentional to just look at them, not to mention harvest them, right? Okay, so it is pretty powerful when we move away from that spot planting into group planting. And I'm going to talk about this now. One of the biggest benefits for the home gardener with this is that when you have more of the same thing together, it just becomes easier to take care of them. It might not, for those of you that need, why exactly is that? I can't really even think of it exactly, except to say that they're all massed together, and what you do for one, you're doing for all. And typically in my book, I don't do much for anything. It's just easier to care for them. Like when you first plant them, they're going to need more attention to watering. They might need some intentional editing or pruning, some people call it. When you mass together, instead of spotting them out, it just makes for easier care. And I have lived this and found it to be so totally true. And then for the way your landscape looks from the road, the other thing to do is ride around in really nice neighborhoods and study their landscapes. The ones that are like, oh my gosh, look at that one. Stop and look at it for a minute. I can almost promise you it's got larger plantings of fewer types. And it may be repeated throughout the yard, some up against the house, and then maybe out in the island next to the street, there's a repeat of one of the same shrubs out there in a mass. It's the secret, y'all. I'm telling you, and I wish somebody had told me. I just can't tell you how long I struggled with this. Anyway, so Without knowing it, by doing this, you're creating vocal points. You're creating more harmonizing landscapes, particularly for the ones that you see from inside your home. I mean, who really cares what the people driving down the street think, right? I mean, we might, but not really. It's all about you and what the landscape is doing for you. And it's attracting creatures for us, and making it easier to take care of. Now, one of the things that I love to do is to pick a strategic spot in my landscape of shrubs and place either hardy annuals or warm season annuals. And by the way, I have no landscape right now, y'all. I mean, on the front of my house anyway. It's a point of contention between my sister and I. She thinks that I should have an elaborate landscape. But the whole rest of our property is pretty elaborately landscaped, but not so much for the public's consumption, right? Anyway, carving out a spot for you to be able to dabble in every year is so satisfying, because one of the things we found, or I figured out back when I first started farming, once I filled up my whole place with perennials and shrubs and woodies is what we call them in the flower farming world, I had no space left. There was really nothing other than weeding constantly for me to do and to split perennials. So in a landscaping situation, which, typically shrubs are the kind of foundation of that, to carve out some strategic spots where you do get to plug in some color that'll happen, where your shrubs typically, they may or may not bloom. And if they do bloom, it's not for long. And having a large pocket amongst the shrubs is just that seasonal change we all kind of crave, right? And where would that spot be? It's those spots that you're going to enjoy them the most, like along the sidewalk where you walk into your house, your front porch, maybe where your mailbox is, where you go every day to get the mail. Those are the spots that it's just so nice to have a spot where you change out the annuals from warm to cool every year. How fun is that? Not to mention that allows you to try different stuff, right? And I think it's the funnest because in addition of just changing out with seasons, you can try different colors. I mean, and you soon learn your mistakes. I remember the year that Suzanne and I used to go over to the local landscape place where we can buy wholesale and buy lots of fall pansies and stuff because we have big family gatherings in the fall. And one year I've always gotten white or yellow, and because they look great in the fall and they also look good in the spring, those colors. One year, I've always admired the lavender and the purple ones. They were just always so beautiful. And I said, by golly, I think they're pretty. I'm getting them. And then I so quickly learned why I hadn't gotten them in the past. You can't see them unless you're standing right on top of them, which that's okay if that's your mailbox. But just know that. You learn. But I was able to know that, okay, I won't make that mistake again because I'll be changing that out in spring to warm season stuff, right? So it's just really fun to be able to carve out a spot in addition to maintaining your landscape that you actually get to garden in. And I know that for me, if you've ever been here for an open farm, my big hellebore garden that's underneath my big saucer magnolia tree, it is spectacular. January through about April. That's when the hellebores just really put on a show, but then they kind of get nondescript. They're just vegetation. They're beautiful, but there's no color. And that's when I bring annuals in, and I do that by large containers. And that's when I bring in, caladiums and asparagus ferns with either begonias or impatiens in a bright color that's available that year. And that just brings that pop to me. And I don't even think about those hellebores. They get no maintenance, right? So creating the color that you might want in a strategic spot lowers the maintenance, ups the game on how it looks, and makes it so much easier, y'all. And it can be really low investment if you're starting from seed. You can strategically plan your seed starting for that spot because you kind of know what you're doing, right? You know what size it is and you get the feel of it. And it just makes your landscape even more enjoyable. And then I just want to mention a note about soil quality and health. You know, most landscape beds up against homes is pretty crummy soil. The drainage is usually bad, and you know, planting your landscape is a good time to help beef that up. You know, increase your drainage, raise the bed a little bit to help that. But two things you can do to increase and make your soil better with each and every planting or season. I meant to say, sorry, not planting. With each season is that in that, first off, in that spot where you're planting annuals a couple times a year that you're starting from seed, is at each one of those plantings, I'm putting in an inch or two of compost to incorporate along with dry organic fertilizer. That stuff feeds your soil, makes it healthier, and gets it better with each passing application. So your soil's getting better and better. And then you can mulch your mixed border with an inch or two of compost. You can throw down mulch on top of it if you want to, but that's nutrition. You know, for us, I'm of the thought that landscape plants don't really need fertilization. If they're just sitting there looking pretty, going through life, if you did a half decent job of preparing your soil in the beginning, you probably don't need to do anything other than add an inch or two of either leaf mold or compost, which just breaks down and feeds the soil that's taking care of your shrubs. But for these annuals that are like big bang for your buck blooming, they're harder working. It's just better to add a little bit of compost and organic dry fertilizer according to directions, because good soil health is truly the foundation for the least amount of struggling for your plants, and it minimizes maintenance, y'all. Less disease and pest pressure, the whole 9 yards. All right. So friends, these were just some of my practical tips. And I'm just going to run through some here. You know, mapping out your current plan is one of the funnest things that I do. I just love doing that. I mean, I have drawings of my gardens. They're just all over my studio in stacks and my old notebooks. And it's just so fun. And that leads me to creating a seasonal calendar for planting, which I'm talking about kind of like my future. What do I want to plant? And you know, I live off of that big calendar journal, and that's the place that I do a lot of this planning. And you want to know where a excellent place to because the big calendar journal is really it can be anything you want it, but I use it for seed starting and noting from our work and cutting gardens in strategic ways so that it becomes a journal. The back side of those calendar pages, they're 20 by 30 inches, y'all. Now, they're not graph paper, but you can do a lot of dreaming and planning about, you want to add these shrubs. You know, you find a shrub in May that you just fall in love with. Well, that's not the time to actually buy and plant it, y'all. Remember, fall planting, putting that on your calendar is a great way to remind yourself and to do some dreaming and to have endless paper to actually draw on. So planning is really a fun thing to do. And then remember, mass plant everything. Trees, 3 trees in a distance at proper spacing are to behold. Not everybody has space for that. But when you're planting shrubs, perennials, and annuals, mass planting leads to more soothing landscapes, more attractive, as well as lower maintenance and better for pollinators and wildlife. And remember to feed your soil at every planting, and whenever you go to mulch. Mulch does ultimately break down to your soil, but it takes a long time, and it's nothing you want to rely on for that. Putting an inch or two of compost, even if you just buy a few bags and dump them in the area that seems to not be the greatest to you, and spread it out to be a couple inches thick, and then just put a little bit of mulch on top of it to make it look pretty, that goes so far, y'all, in helping your soil. Now, friends, this can just be a fun journey for you for the rest of your landscape life in your yard. I mean, recording your garden, drawing your garden, and just looking back on it to see how far you've come. So I hope this has helped to take some of these tips that I learned as a flower farmer, kind of through me stumbling through becoming a flower farmer and thinking, why don't we do that for home gardens? You know, that was really how I felt like the first 5 years of flower farming. I was a new gardener. I had just gone through the Master Gardener program, which didn't really do anything to help me become a flower farmer except lead me to a lot of resources, which I considered later on to be very, very helpful. But as I then became a part of a cut flower community through a lot of different ways, I walked around people, you know, I got to go to people's farms because you're part of these groups. And I would walk around and say, why did we not know about this as home gardeners? It would have helped us so much, right? And the way we set up our landscapes, it's no wonder they're weedy messes, y'all. So I hope it helped. And remember, my friend, everything we do for you. And I can't wait for you to have my newest book in your hands that's coming out in March of 2027, y'all. Growing a Beautiful Life. And it is my starting my life of meeting Steve and getting married and becoming a flower farmer and building the business, and then where all the other places the businesses have gone. And what I've realized after reading it, the manuscript so many times, is I am pretty dadgum good at restarting, because that's really what life is all about, is being willing to hit the restart button when things don't go as planned, and see what offers are available to you, and pursuing your dream. So friends, please consider pre-ordering the book. It will help me. You won't find it at thegardenersworkshop.com, but we have the links to lead you to all the big booksellers there. Jesse will put the link in the show notes, and it helps me so much. The pre-sales are what lay the groundwork for how much the book will get exposure once it arrives in March of 2027. So your pre-order will help me so much. And I thank you in advance if you see fit to pre-order. And so, my friends, until we meet again, ciao.